Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast. I'm Simon Marks, live from Washington, D.C. And these are the top headlines on a very busy Thursday. Breaking news from Colombo. United National Party leader Ranil Wickremesinghe is the new Prime Minister of Sri Lanka. It's the 6th time that he becomes the leader of the island nation. The Kremlin responds to Finland's move to join NATO, saying it won't help security in Europe. It says Moscow's response will depend on steps NATO takes to bring its military infrastructure closer to Russia's borders. Qatar's ruler meets Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi in Tehran as talks falter on bringing Washington back into the 2015 nuclear deal between Iran and major powers. Panic buying grips Beijing supermarkets as rumors swirl online that Chinese authorities are about to impose a 3-day lockdown, prompting many to rush out to buy food. And India's retail inflation surged to 7.79% in April, driven by rising fuel and food prices, a figure well above the Reserve Bank of India's upper tolerance limit for a 4th consecutive month. And so we begin with the breaking news from Colombo. Ranil Wickremesinghe has taken the oath as the new Prime Minister of Sri Lanka. The former United National Party Member of Parliament is assuming office for the 6th time. The decision to appoint Wickremesinghe as the new Prime Minister comes 2 days after Mahinda Rajapaksa's resignation. The 6-time Prime Minister will lead an all-party government in Sri Lanka, despite the objections raised against his selection.
Because finally it's a matter for Parliament, the person who commands the confidence.
So we're joined by Dasuni Athauda from Colombo on the line from the Sri Lankan capital. Dasuni, with Ranil Wickremesinghe taking the oath, what more updates do we have? What kind of cabinet could he be heading?
The leader of the United National Party was just sworn in as the new Prime Minister of Sri Lanka. So Ranil Wickremesinghe will now work with President Gotabaya Rajapaksa in his capacity as a Prime Minister. That is the latest update we have so far. He is expected to arrive at his ancestral temple, which is the Valukarame temple here in Colombo shortly, where the media is waiting for his arrival, where he is expected to engage in religious observances before he officially assumes duties and takes on the role as the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka.
And Dasani, the veteran Sri Lankan politician has been Prime Minister in the past. He's going to have his plate full, isn't he? What are his immediate priorities going to be?
Well, right off the bat, it is quite evident that Prime Minister Wickremesinghe will now be heading a country that is also part of a political crisis just as much as its economic crisis. Coming out of Sri Lanka's economic crisis will be the top priority of this Prime Minister, and we are also expected to have a new cabinet within this week as well. So that is expected. That will be another developing story to see who will be leading the new cabinet and what portfolios will be given to what ministers. And because there is so much of a talk of an interim government as well, it will be interesting to see how the party allocation will come about with this new cabinet, how many cabinet positions will be given to those sitting in the opposition, as well as how many cabinet positions will be given to those in the current government as well. Stay with WION as we bring you the very latest.
WION's correspondent in Colombo, Dasani Athauda. Clearly a very dynamic, fast-moving situation in Sri Lanka, and particularly in the country's capital. It will be very interesting to see in the days ahead if, as Prime Minister, Ranil Wickremesinghe is able to bring some of the very voluble street protests that have gripped the island nation for the last several days to some degree of control. So we will keep our eye firmly on Sri Lanka. Stay with WION for continuing coverage of the crisis there as the new Prime Minister takes control. We're going to move on now, and as we predicted yesterday, the United States Senate has failed to codify the right to abortion for Americans yet again. The Women's Health Protection Act failed to pass a threshold vote in the Senate that would have opened debate. The act would have enshrined the protections offered by the 1973 landmark Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision into federal law for the first time. But it didn't happen, halted in its tracks by a final vote of 49 to 51. All Republicans voted no, along with Democrat Senator Joe Manchin of conservative-leaning West Virginia, while the rest of the Democrats voted yes. The outcome of the vote was never in doubt, given the 50-50 split in the US Senate and the deep partisan divide that exists over abortion rights.
On this vote, the yeas are 49, the nays are 51. 3/5 of the Senate. Sadly, the Senate failed to stand in defense of a woman's right to make decisions about her own body. And let's be clear, the majority of the American people believe in defending a woman's right, her choice, to decide what happens to her own body. And this vote clearly suggests that the Senate is not where the majority of Americans are on this issue.
But the Senate session exposed a deep bipartisan divide. Both the Democrats and Republicans portrayed each other as extremists, and the debate grew passionate as lawmakers contemplated the demise of a right that has existed for nearly half a century and one of the most divisive issues in American society.
Madam President.
Majority Leader. On this vote, 3/5 of the senators.
Today it will be Roe. Tomorrow it will be a national ban on abortion. And beyond that, something even more dreadful. We cannot allow this shameful backslide to happen. We cannot allow the whims of MAGA Republicans to bully the rest of the country into submission.
Where's the compassion? Where's the humanity? Where's the attempt to understand that the majority of Americans want there to be prohibitions on abortions at some point in the pregnancy?
We're not living in a hypothetical anymore. We are staring a post-Roe world in the face, and the time to act is now. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle have also made it clear. If they regain control of this chamber, they will pass a national ban on abortion rights.
It's the Abortion on Demand Act, without restrictions, without limitations. It promotes abortion at a scale far beyond Roe versus Wade and far beyond what the vast majority of the American people are comfortable with.
And so to WION's correspondent Susan Tehrani, joining us again live from New York City. Susan, we predicted it yesterday, spot on. We knew this was always going to be a futile effort by Democrats to try and enshrine the protections for abortion rights into federal law. And yet the Democrats still seem to think that this was a worthwhile endeavour.
Absolutely. And as we talked about a little bit yesterday, first of all, it's to really rave up the voter base on the one hand, because they wholeheartedly believe that this is a first step to the ballot box. And it makes sense. You know, it's a popular issue among many Americans, and they see it as an issue where the more they're vocal about it, the more they basically yell and scream about it, the more attention it will garner. And as you know, a political strategist always say, when you see politicians talk about something more, it means that it is a winning issue for them. And when they don't talk about it at all, then you know that's a sign that they it's a losing issue for them. And this issue of abortion really is something that the majority of Americans, at least, favor somewhat the Democratic position. But then on the other hand, you know, establishment Democrats for years, at least in recent years, have taken a beating from progressives and many other Democrats and constituents that they've abandoned their voter base, and they're not doing enough. They're not fiery enough, for example, like individuals that have come in, for example, AOC and others. So this was perhaps even on a personal level Chuck Schumer's opportunity to show that he does have, you know, that gravitas, so to say, to go up and fight for something like this. But then there are Republicans and also, you know, moderates like Joe Manchin and his own party that just don't allow for something like this to go through. But it doesn't mean Chuck Schumer did not try.
Now, we saw abortion rights protesters on the steps of the Supreme Court last week chanting, "Do something, Democrats." At this point, is there anything else the Democrats can try to do, or does the country just have to wait for that Supreme Court opinion, if the draft opinion is indeed to be the final opinion, to be officially promulgated?
You know, what's interesting is since that draft opinion had been leaked, both sides of the aisle, mostly Democrats, have spent something around $3 million on political ads, which is the highest in recent years on the issue of abortion. On the one side, the Republican is up for you know, Senate saying that abortion is murder, you know, trying to garner their supporters, and then, you know, Democrats on the other hand, like Gavin Newsom, for example, in California even having one of the most liberal laws on abortion, going, you know, very far as saying we will not go back, you know, vote Democrat, and so on and so forth. So the campaigning and the political ads that are coming out is something that they're continuing with, despite the fact that we really don't have a final outcome, and we probably won't until the end of June and early July. But yes, we will have to wait and see whether or not, you know, this is a definitive answer on the part of the Supreme Court, but that has not stopped, you know, mostly Democrats from continuing their activism regarding this issue. It's just yet to be seen, you know, whether or not it'll work or not, because we have to bear in mind the majority of the country is not on extremes on either side of the abortion debate. They're somewhat in the middle.
And of course, the hunt for the source of the leak continues. That could be an interesting story to keep an eye on. WION's Susan Tehrani, live for us again on the streets of New York. Thanks very much indeed for that. Now, Japan has agreed to further cooperation with the European Union during a Japan-EU summit. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and European Council President Charles Michel held bilateral meetings with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. The European leaders warned against the Russian threat, citing the barbaric war in Ukraine.
This brings me to Russia. It is today the most direct threat to the world order, with a barbaric war against Ukraine and its worrying pact with China.
ロシアによるウクライナ侵略は欧州にとどまらずアジアを含む国際秩序の根幹を揺るがすものであり、決して許されません。日本は EU を含む G7 と協調して強力な対ロ制裁を実施するとともにウクライナへの支援を強化してまいります。
The summit also focused on tensions building in Asia, with the European diplomats focusing on Beijing's increasing threats and expansionism in the Indo-Pacific. Those issues, of course, on the agenda here in Washington today, as President Biden meets with ASEAN leaders here. The European Council President urged China to play a more constructive role in the global world order.
Our cooperation in Ukraine is critical in Europe, but it's also important in the Indo-Pacific. And we also want to deepen our consultations on a more assertive China. We believe that China must stand up to defend the multilateral system that it has benefited from in developing its country.
The United Nations Security Council held an emergency meeting in the face of North Korea's threat to strengthen its nuclear capability. The US wants the 15-member Security Council to enact further sanctions against Pyongyang as Pyongyang prepares for a 7th nuclear test. US Ambassador to the United Nations Linda Thomas-Greenfield is warning that the Security Council must act.
We're now nearing the end of negotiations on the U.S. proposed draft resolution, and we cannot wait until the DPRK conducts additional provocative, illegal, dangerous acts like a nuclear test. We need to speak up now with a strong and unified voice in condemnation of the DPRK's behavior.
North Korea has been subject to UN sanctions since 2006 over its nuclear and ballistic missile programs. But now the country has dramatically ramped up its sanctions-busting missile launches. It's conducted more than a dozen weapons tests since January. Veto powers China and Russia oppose efforts to raise further sanctions against North Korea. In fact, both have long been pushing for the Security Council to ease measures that are in place against the country.
美方援引联合国宪章第7章提出新的决议草案，核心是进一步追加制裁。这不是应对当前半岛局势的合适方式。
Американским коллегам, что переговоры – это улица с двусторонним движением. Совершенно бесперспективно ожидать от Пхеньяна безоговорочного разоружения под угрозой раскручивания санкционной спирали и гарантий ничем не подкрепленных обещаний.
And we stay in North Korea because on the day the United States reported its 1 millionth death from COVID-19, North Korea is reporting its first ever outbreak since the start of the pandemic. The government in Pyongyang called it the gravest national emergency. It ordered a nationwide lockdown. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has imposed a strict nationwide set of restrictions on the country, adding that North Korea will mobilize emergency reserve medical supplies. But the government did not provide any details on the number of cases or the possible source of infection, adding simply that samples of infections were collected on Monday of this week. The first official COVID case could lead to a major crisis in the country because North Korea has refused to accept international assistance with vaccinations. It has turned down offers of vaccines from the World Health Organization, China and Russia. Moreover, its crumbling public health infrastructure might struggle to deal with any major outbreak. Kim Jong-un had previously declared an emergency in July of 2020 after a man started showing symptoms of the virus in North Korea. And now the latest on the COVID crisis in China. Beijing has doubled down on its curbs, putting hundreds of millions of people and dozens of cities under movement restrictions. In the Chinese capital, taxi services were suspended in 3 of the city's districts, and Shanghai continues to tighten its COVID regulations. Amid all of this, one American citizen has managed to escape China after 65 days there.
I'm on the final leg of my journey here, and I just wanted to say a quick goodbye to everyone in China. There's a lot of really lovely people here, and I hope that you guys survive these lockdowns with as little pain as possible.
For the last 65 days, American Laura Hudson has been on a mission to leave China. She quit her teaching job in China's northeastern city of Changchun on March the 8th for reasons unrelated to the global health crisis. But the city announced a lockdown 3 days later. This kept Hudson confined to her apartment for most of March and April without a functioning hot water heater. She spent most of her time writing a book, figuring how to buy food and working out ways to get a flight out.
Here's all my canceled flights.
After Changchun lifted its lockdown and multiple plane tickets cancellations, she flew out of the city on Wednesday morning to Beijing to catch another plane that afternoon that will eventually bring her to Los Angeles.
I don't think I will leave the United States for quite a long time after I get back, to be honest.
客观理性
On Wednesday, China hit back against what it called irresponsible comments by the World Health Organization chief on the country's COVID policies.
When we talk about the zero COVID strategy, we don't think that it's sustainable.
Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus' comments were not covered in China's state media and were censored on social media. The zero COVID policy has placed hundreds of millions of people across dozens of cities under various degrees of movement restrictions, most dramatically in Shanghai, which is now in its 6th week under a sweeping lockdown. Officials said on Wednesday that half the city had achieved zero COVID status, but restrictions would remain in place. In Beijing, many businesses have been closed and large numbers of people were told to work from home. China's Palace Museum, or Forbidden City, will be shut down temporarily from May the 12th.
Finally from us today, the Ukrainian capital Kyiv is trying to come back to life. Some of its restaurants, cafes and gyms have now reopened. We're going to finish today with a story about a boxing club in downtown Kyiv, which has recently reopened to provide people with a chance to ease the stress caused by war in Ukraine. Thanks for watching WION Live Broadcast from Washington, D.C. I'll see you again soon. Stay with WION. World is One.
It serves as an emotional relief in such times. It helps to discharge stress accumulated through the day, especially from the news.
Under these circumstances, sports is the only activity where one can really engage and make good use of himself. Myself, I am from Donetsk, and I am reliving this situation for the second time. A deja vu of sorts, but sports helps.